How's it going, everybody? What I'm going to cover in this video are some of the things that we talked about last night, and specifically I'm going to go over again how to match data, the census data, but then how to create variables of interest within ArcMap that we can use for our mapping projects. So all of the data that I'm going to use here, both the shapefile, the geography file, and the data are available on MassGIS. So what we're going to do first is we will open up the census tracts file, and you'll see we'll have information for the whole state. To make things a little easier, let's just select out the county of interest, which is county number 25. So we'll take the Phipps County code is equal to 25. And you'll see when we apply that, it will select the tracts just for the city of Boston, and we'll say OK. And to make things a little bit easier, what we'll also do is we'll create a layer that is just those tracts so that we don't have to focus on the whole state. And if we get rid of this, we should be able to focus in then on just these tracts. And I believe there are 204 tracts initially. What you also may remember is that we ran into a little bit of an issue with the zero population tracts. And so if we scroll all the way over, you'll see that there's a variable called pop100. This is the 100% count of the population. And if we sort this, you'll see that there are 4 tracts that have no population. And so we can get rid of these tracts. Typically they tend to be water tracts or right around where they're part of the city or the city maintains the area, but they just don't have any residential populations. So what we will do is we will select all of the tracts except those, and then we will create another layer that excludes those. And so we right click and go to selection and then create layer. And so I will just turn this off and get rid of it. So now we are going to be working with a base file of 200 tracts. And again, if we look at the population, we see that every census tract in our data has a non-zero population. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to match in the race and ethnic data that was provided by the census. And the way that we do that is we will right click on the layer and then go down to joins and relates and then click on join. And here is where we are going to tell ArcMap what is the linking variable to use for the purposes of matching in the census data. And the website told us that we should use this variable log SF1. And now we're going to choose the data that we want to match in. And again, these are all tables that are made available to us from the MassGIS website. And we're going to be looking for the files that have an underscore CT, and that CT stands for census tract. And we'll click on the population race table and click add. And the variable that we want to use for the purposes of joining in the census data is logrec_no, or logical record number. And before we perform the match, let's just check to make sure it will work. And you see here that in fact we were able to match all 200 of the census tracts to the census data. So what we're going to do next, once that we have matched in, and notice that we're working with a temporary layer, I just want to export this into a permanent file, just so in case anything happens, we don't have to redo all the work that we have done. So I'm going to export this, and it will ask where to save it, and I will call it Boston, just for the purposes of illustration, Boston 1104. And you'll see now what we have is a permanent file that includes all of the information that we had. So the join, when we were working with the temporary file, is temporary. We can undo it. Once we've saved the data as a permanent shapefile, that join becomes fixed or permanent. So the next thing that we are going to do is we're going to create a variable using the data that we have matched in. And specifically what I'm going to do is I will create a variable that is the percent of the population that is non-Latino white, or what they will also refer to as non-Hispanic, non-Latino, Latinx white. So the way that we create this variable is first we will go to add field, and then we will specify this as the variable type of double, and I will call this PCT underscore NHW and say OK. And you see that we now have a new column and all of the values are set to 0. So what we have to do is we have to tell ArcMap how to populate these fields. And so the way that we do that is we will right click on the column title and then go to field calculator. And what we will see here is that we are going to create the percent non-Hispanic or Latino white. And I just put everything in parentheses. So we're going to take the number of non-Hispanic white individuals. We're going to divide that by the total population in the census tract. And then we'll multiply that by 100. And let's see. And what we now have is a variable that it worked because we didn't run into that problem with the zeros, which was like a total bummer. And we have all valid fields. So, I mean, no missing or nothing strange happened here. So we now have a variable that tells us the percent of each census tract that is non-Hispanic or non-Latino white. And we can create similar variables for the other racial and ethnic groups. What we will do here now is we can map this characteristic. And so the way that we do that is we would go to properties and then symbology and then quantities. And we're going to look for that variable that we just created. And you see we have these colors, and let's see, let's pick something a little bit different. And we can make it 6 categories, it's fine. And so once we have this information, you see that we now can look at, for example, the number of, the distributional qualities of this population across the city of Boston. And so for the purposes of example, we could also then, for example, overlay this distribution with other characteristics. So for example, we could add information about the location of hate crimes, or in this example, we can look at the distribution of homicides across the city and how that distribution corresponds with other information that we know about the city. And last night there was a question about how do we link these data, and it's not linking in the way that the way I think about linking is that first process where we're taking 2 data sources and we're merging them together. Here, what we're doing is we're overlaying the distribution of homicides over information about the communities or about the social space underlying. So where are these, not only where are the homicides happening, which we see here, right? We just, where are the homicides? But it's more when we're talking about the distribution from a theoretical perspective. What we are getting at is not just where do they concentrate, but why would we expect the concentration to happen in the neighborhoods or the communities where they do? And so that's where we can use an example of social disorganization theory that makes certain claims about the neighborhood, and then map it to see to what extent is there support or mixed support for that theoretical proposition. What we can also do is match additional data to this file in the same way. So there's nothing about the matching process that limits us to just matching in one table at a time. So for example, we could also join to this file, and again, we're going to use the log SF, and let's see if we go back to the database folder, and if we look at the residential characteristics and we add that information, and again, we're going to match based on logical record number. And if we validate, we should see something very similar. And so we'll say OK, and then OK again. And when we look at the attribute table, you will see that not only do we have all of the racial ethnic information, but then we also have a lot of the household or housing information for those same geographic areas. And so if we were to match in a number of tables, I think it's always a good idea to export that shapefile, just so that you don't have to redo any of the work that we have done. And so now I'm just going to get rid of this, and you'll see in the attribute table we should have all of the housing information. So if we wanted to look at, for example, disorganization theory talks a lot about residential characteristics and mobility. And so one of the things that we can also talk about is vacancy as that's a characteristic that is also mentioned in theory such as broken windows. And so if we wanted to know the percent of the housing units that are vacant, we will have to look at the variables that are available to us. And so here we have number of vacant houses in this by tract, and we have to, if we create a variable, a percent of households that are vacant, we have to also know the total number of households. And so we know that variable is here. So let's create now the percent of housing, the percent vacancy. And so the process is the same, where we will add a field, and I will call this PCT_VAC. Variable type, again, is double. And let's just be absolutely sure that there are households in all of these census tracts, because if there aren't, we could run into the same zero issue. And so, yeah, let's, before we create that variable, calculate it, let's go back and get rid of these zeros. Lose those zeros, right? And find ourselves some heroes. That's what we're doing right here. And what we will do is I will just create a new temporary layer from from this, and so we'll clear that. And so now when we open the attribute table, if things go according to plan, we should be able to calculate this variable without any trouble. So the way that we do that is we will right click on that column and click on Field Calculator, and then %vacancy is going to be equal to, I'm going to have to scroll down a little bit, the number of vacant housing units. We're going to divide that by the total number of housing units, which is up here. And then we will multiply this by 100. All right. So I am glad that that worked. So here you see that we have now calculated vacancy for all of these census tracts. It looks like it went off without any trouble. And so now we can look at the distribution of vacancy across vacant households, vacant housing units, I guess, across the city, with the darker colors indicating higher levels of vacancy. And if we were interested, we could also, based on a theoretical perspective, is we could add the distribution of homicides. And what we see, right, we could make some theoretically informed interpretations. So should that be part of one of the hypotheses that we wanted to test? So would broken windows theory expect vacant places with vacant housing to have a higher likelihood of homicides? Yeah, I think that's a fair hypothesis. And what we see is that there is some support for that, but also it's limited in the fact that the areas with the highest levels of vacancy also don't seem to be characterized by high levels of homicide, but in the mid-range for sure. And that could be there. I mean, that could be understandable too, in the sense that if there's not that many people there, it could be that there's not that much activity, not much opportunity. So that is the process whereby we match in data and create variables. And so I will stop there. And if you have questions, please let me know. I'll be available this weekend and around all of next week. Thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye. So, guys, there's one last thing I wanted to show you, and that is in the folder, the directory that includes the census data. I mentioned that there is documentation, so census documentation, and there's this file called sf1.pdf, and this is going to include like super detailed information about all kinds of aspects of the like the data collection process, what every variable is, how it's defined in terms of the census. So there's all kinds of information. Very, very useful, but not super engaging reading. And my suspicion or my belief, or the only reason why you would be looking at this file, is so that you would be able to identify the variables, right? You'd be able to know how to define and operationalize the variables. But when we downloaded that information from NHGIS, or I'm sorry, mass.gis, there's a file here called SF1, and it's MGIS fields. And when we open that, what you see is this has every column that is included in the data, every column that we matched in, for example. It has what the variable is called, what table it's from in the census, and then what does the variable contain. And so this, in essence, I think is all you will need for the purposes of constructing the variables of interest. So you can look at the sf1.pdf. It takes a while to get used to them, and they're kind of hard to navigate. They're kind of not super intuitive, but this file here, I think, will have everything that you need. All right. Thanks again. If you have questions, let me know. I'll talk to you soon.